Welcome back to our panel discussion, The Future of Government Data Centers, sponsored by Avnet Government Solutions and NetApp, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Kimberly Hancher, the CIO of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Andre Mendez, the Director of Global Operations for the Broadcasting Board of Governors, Darren House, Director of Solutions Management at Avnet Government Solutions, Sean Kingsbury, CIO of the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board, and Raj Rana, the Senior Systems Engineering Manager for Partner Ecosystems at NetApp. And before we were talking about the as-is state, let's go now looking forward, since this is the future of data centers, to what your to-be state is envisioned for, say, 18 months, 2 to 3 years out. I think any further than that's kind of hard to predict in this budget environment. But what would you like to be in 18 months to 3 years, Kimberly? And also, if you could overlay that with the idea of shared services, which goes along with all of this consolidation and modernizing effort.
Well, when this administration came out with the cloud first policy, EOC was one of the early adopters, and we made it our policy that when we had new requirements that we would look at cloud-based services first. And we really have an implementation plan that allowed us to use, to really focus on like software as a service, cloud services, for almost like commodity services. So like web meeting and some of the things that are just make so much sense to have in the cloud. And we really explicitly said that we're going to wait on our mission systems till we knew a little bit more about the cloud. So we started out in the area of disaster recovery, moving from I guess you would call it a cold disaster recovery type of strategy to more of a replicated or online hot, site. And although we considered putting it at one of our field sites, we really thought that a cloud-based provider would be better. So we established a replicated environment for disaster recovery, and now we're planning to actually move the hosting of our mission systems to the cloud. And that's something that we will be doing over the next 6 months.
Oh, so you have a time window not of 18 months, but really within a year.
Yes.
You expect that to go.
Yes, I really do.
Do you have the in-house expertise to turn on virtualization and mount it on a remote server and make sure it works?
This is actually going to go to one of our our hosting provider. So they will be, they have the burden of responsibility in doing the migration from on-prem to the cloud.
Sure, okay. And Sean, let's talk about the Recovery Board. What is your to-be state, if you would? What are you looking at for the next 18 months to 3 years?
Well, with us, it's not 2 to 3 years because our end of life is coming, right? So, but I think it's important to think through, for everybody to understand that on-prem doesn't necessarily mean you aren't running an on-prem cloud, right? So from that perspective, all of our services are run in a cloud, meaning it's either on-prem or run as a service from a service provider. And I'm going to say we're no different than most federal agencies where everyone really lives in a hybrid configuration, right? So, that's kind of like the status of cloud and workloads, because we have all servers that make sense to be virtualized are virtualized. We have applications that make sense to be virtualized are virtualized. And we have desktops virtualized as well, with different categories of how we deal with that. So when you look at where we are now from a maturity standpoint, from our perspective, it's all about the data, and I think that is becoming understood across the federal government, right? Meaning everything else around that is the hype circle, right? Your data, but then you talk mobile, then you talk applications, virtualization, and what have you, information assurance, right? But it's all about accessing the data, and everything else is either protecting it or interacting with it. So what we're doing is we're actually looking at different ways to actually ask more and get better answers from the data, right? Because and transforming data into more useful information using different approaches. Like when you look at our business in the whole law enforcement, from a law enforcement perspective, it's really looking at entity resolution and how to actually connect the dots in better ways to actually see what this means and who's really connected versus how they say they're connected based on the cases that come in. So really, I mean, we're really moving to the next level in that regard, and we're actually sharing how our approach is to doing that, and that's going to be happening more so over the next, I want to say over the next 3 to 4 months, because we're already doing some of that from a data federation standpoint. That's why I say it's very interesting when you start to look at the space of data centers, and it's really more or less services that you are consuming and services that you're delivering, right? So we already do we're heavily into data federation, pulling data from dispersed data sources, turning it into useful information, and in some cases, like my fellow panelists stated, that it makes sense to have iron, like when I'm processing 300 million records against 100 million rows and I need to do this in 3 minutes, I'm not using virtualization to do that. So I roll that over to my 84 core box to crunch that out but get the results back. That goes back into my cloud construct. So it's going to be more focused on data and really feeding into the business more than technology per se.
So it would be, maybe one way to put it would be, you have the infrastructure
Yes.
that is modernized and new, and now you can focus on what you do with the data in
Yes.
terms of analytics and products delivery. Now, when the recovery board sunsets, does it transmorgifies into there's another board. Is that your group, or is that a whole different group of people, and does your data flow into theirs?
I mean, it's still up in the air on how all things are going to play out. I mean, in some cases, several capabilities are going to go to Treasury based on the Data Act. And
That's
true. In other cases, I mean, we're supporting, like I said, several federal agencies because a lot of the capabilities that we deliver, let's just say lots of federal agencies are understanding that they can leverage from the lessons learned for what we're doing. So we're kind of helping a lot of federal agencies in different ways.
Okay.
Such an important factor, in terms of shared services, is knowing where the expertise is, because we all can't be really good at everything. And, as a small agency, I'm looking for a service provider among another federal agency for things like maybe litigation support software. It's a very specialized set of software services, and I'd rather not build it and host it and figure it out myself. I'd love to be a customer for that kind of shared service.
Sure. Sean?
And just build on that. I mean, that's based on the Consolidated Appropriations Act, that's what we do. We actually are service providers to the law enforcement community, to roughly 29 to 30 federal agencies today, that either we do fraud analytics for federal agencies using, requests for service processes and MOUs to provide virtual desktop as a service to have access to our private analytic cloud infrastructure. So we actually do that.
So that gives agencies the flexibility to consume software as a service. I can't imagine, even except for the largest law firms, anyone hosting their own legal software. It's all cloud-based now, and that's where that whole industry is going. But at the same time, you can offer services that are particular to your expertise.
Right.
In your case, fraud analytics, for example, Sean's case, to other agencies. All right, good. And Andre, you're down from 11 to 3. You mentioned a lot of other places around the world where there's a tower, there's a data center, and so forth. What are you looking at as your status or state down the line?
It really is about the holistic perspective that we have to have as a broadcaster. When you look at what our mission is, it is definitely not to run data centers. It is definitely not to administer servers or storage. Our mission is to basically create fantastic content that we distribute to 100 countries in 63 languages into some of the most oppressive regimes in the world. So that's what we want to focus in. So the long-term plan, the strategic plan dictates that I want to have end-user equipment and networking equipment in my premises and nothing else. And the definition of premises then becomes, completely different than what it used to be, because while we used to be very highly centralized, we are becoming more and more forward deployed so we can be close to the action. And so, with the advent of mobile, both as a data consumption platform, but also as a data contribution platform. Because with all of the citizen journalists out there, we're seeing contributions from mobile phones, from all kinds of mobile platforms. That circumstance changes as well. So for us, the line is very, very clear. Everything that we can get out of the building is going to go out of the building, and because we deal with television, we're going to be seeing the last vestiges of that being the type of equipment that has to deal with high definition television editing, for example, which doesn't lend itself to long-distance traveling. But otherwise, it is all going to be gone. We've already made a very substantial step in terms of that. Most of our applications are cloud-based. We were the second agency, I believe, to go to Office 365. And so that trend is going to continue. We are, in all likelihood, going to set a trend in the broadcast industry. The broadcast industry, by and large, tends to be somewhat risk-averse, and we're not. Our financial circumstances dictate that we need to embrace risk, and part of that is going to be to move a lot of our applications that no other broadcaster would move into a cloud environment before they all do. And then they'll follow our lead.
All right, Darren, at Avnet perspective, what are CIOs asking you to get them to the next state? And is it the CIO? I mean, it's these CIOs, but is it CIOs across government?
So it is CIOs, but it's also being pushed down through the different levels. The CIOs seem to have a very good strategy, a high-level strategy of how to get to the objectives they're trying to achieve, but then how does that move down the organization, down to the data center operators and data center managers, and those things that become, the working problems that you have to try and figure out how to solve those things. I think there's a lot to be said about looking for role models as you go through and trying to figure out where your 3-year plan is and your 5-year plan about how you're going to try and achieve these goals. I believe in a lot of ways there's a convergence that's happening between cloud services, hyperscale, the Amazon, Facebook, Google, and the traditional enterprise providers and how they do best practices within the data center. And looking towards those hyperscale providers and learning some of the best practices that they have, because they've spent lots of money and lots of research figuring out how to monetize technical efficiencies. Taking those lessons learned and applying them to the enterprise data center as it moves to a cloud environment with shared services, with consolidation, is a really good model for trying to figure out where their gaps are in the next steps to move forward. So that's a lot of stuff that we try and push, is looking who those role models are and then figuring out how to do it. And one quick example of that is when we talk about metrics. So eBay last year announced something called digital services efficiency. And I think this is a wonderful model for agencies. It's not going to be easy, it's not fast, it's not free, but it's a plan where right now you can go on eBay, I think it's dse.ebay.com, where they have metrics that show at any given time and point how much it's costing them and how much revenue they're making for every transaction, every 1,000 URLs and stuff like that. And they've created what they call a per kilowatt hour metric. And that's the PUE, that's the gold standard of how they manage their business. And so the capabilities are there, the information is there in the technology. It's just harnessing that data, getting value on that data, and then making decisions that are right for your mission and your organization.
Raj, do you see that, the people trying to get some metrics around and measurements around what they're doing so that they can tell if they're more efficient and maybe save money, but maybe not necessarily save money?
So I think there's definitely interest in metrics because it's one of the benefits of moving to the cloud is the overall cost savings. But I mean, it's not the only one. I think I wanted to touch on a point that Sean brought up about the data, and really the core of whatever strategy you decide to implement. It's very specific per each agency, right? Each agency has their own mission, and that's going to dictate where along that spectrum you reside with regards to your cloud strategy, whether it's a private cloud that you hold on your own premises, whether it's leveraging a service provider, or even in some cases, agencies themselves acting as service providers to others, and then finally that hyperscaler approach. So what we're moving towards is understanding that you may go all in on one, or likely you'll have some combination of the three, and that combination may change over time. And so the reality is that since it's not a finite, it's not a set metric, it's not a set, it's not defined which of those three you'll be leveraging. What we're looking to do is really define a data fabric. right? At the end of the day, as part of your core mission, if data is your lifeblood, then that is the piece that is one of the most important things from an IT perspective that you'll have is ensuring, protecting that data and ensuring that it's available. So agencies are becoming data stewards. Regardless of what are these three, regardless of which approach you leverage, you have to ensure that your data is available, your data is accessible, and that if for whatever reason you need to move it around, you have that capability. And that's really what we're driving towards from a NetApp perspective, is to ensure that a lot of the hesitation, so a lot of the hesitation that agencies have is not knowing which one is right, and whether it's through lack of comfort, whether it's through lack of expertise, or whatever the reasons may be, or even the technical reasons, technological reasons as to why it doesn't make sense. Agencies are going to pick one variation of those three. We want to make sure that regardless of what you choose, the data is available to you, and you can and you have the freedom to move it around as easily as possible.
So data becomes almost like a supply in and of itself, separate from all the processing and even separate from the applications.
So that's exactly it. For compute, right, if you think about it as a cycle or networking, right, that's just a packet comes, a packet goes. They're very transient, it's very ephemeral. It kind of comes and goes. Data is not. Data has gravity. Once it's there, it stays, it persists. And not only does it persist, but it starts to collect other things around that. And as you start to unlock the data and make it accessible externally to other agencies, to end users, the value of that data increases. So it's something that, data has a life of its own, and it's important to treat that separately than simply compute, or than you would treat compute or networking resources.
All right, on that note, we will go to a short break. Our guests today are Andre Mendez, the Director of Global Operations for the Broadcasting Board of Governors, Sean Kingsbury, the CIO of the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board, Kimberly Hancher, CIO of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Raj Rana, the Senior Systems Engineering Manager for the Partner Ecosystem at NetApp, and Darren House, Director of Solutions Management at Avnet Government Solutions. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This discussion is the future of government data centers, sponsored by Avnet Government Solutions and NetApp, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.